Paragraph 1. So mid-class Americans have debt not because of luxury items, is what he's saying there. So some people think that. So middle-class Americans, debt not from luxury items. Great. Second sentence, last sentence of the paragraph. So they tell us that the food costs have gone down. In the 70s they were 20%, and I think now they are 10%. Great, let's keep going. First sentence here. Who's Warren now? Okay. So we ended up reading this whole paragraph because it's just 2 sentences, which is fine. So here I'm not going to break it all down. They talk about the dual income family and the wife going to work. Dual income family and wife to work. Let's go on to here. This is just like this because I had to scrunch this to fit in the passage. When you're working your homework or working in Grockit, you can stretch it and you'll be fine. There we go. Sorry. Last paragraph right here. So here it's interesting that the price of, they can have higher, this guy's being a little bit funky. They can have a higher living with less discretionary funds. And believe me, this is not that far off my chicken scratches when I'm actually taking the GMAT. And then, however, this higher standard of living masks the real culprit behind the financial squeeze. So financial anxiety isn't the product of too many lattes and designer shoes. It is the result of increased costs from the cornerstones of modern life. So here the author is sort of making their point. They started up over here saying, people think this, but really this, and then really, really this. So the author is sort of making this argument here. The author's main purpose in writing the passage is to discuss a problem that has been resolved. I don't think the problem has been resolved. That doesn't seem appropriate. There seems to be some issues here. The author has their contrarian opinion. Rebut a popular view. So many observers, the author is rebuting and disagreeing all over the place. Let's hold on to that. Let's get rid of that. Suggest a solution to a problem. There may be a problem here, but I don't think the author is suggesting any solutions. Questioning research methods is too specific. It would have been all over the place if it was the main purpose of the passage. And discredit experts. He mentions Harvard professor Elizabeth Warren, but he doesn't spend the whole passage discrediting her, where he does spend the whole passage arguing and rebuting at the top, at the middle, and at the beginning, and at the end. Great, so I'm going to go with this guy. Very good. So this next question, everyone tell me in the chat box, what type of question is it? What type of question is this? See how the latency is. The strategy of first line and last line does not always work. It's not really about always working or not working. It's really an individual thing. You should have enough time to read all of the questions you should have enough time to read the whole passage if that's your preferred style of doing it on the GMAT. We're doing it this way in class just to sort of move along, and I also want people to know that it does actually work quite a bit. I use that method. I don't usually read the whole passage myself to start. But you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. That works great as well. So we should be getting that this is an infer or imply question, but the latency might be nice. Very good. Nice work, Yash and Divs. We have the word imply here. So we have a inference question. Dual income. I remember I wrote something about dual income in the second paragraph. Let's go ahead and reread the second paragraph just so we can answer this question. So he's saying people are making more money because the wife is also working, but that also brings on more costs. So we're looking for a paraphrase of that. They would have fewer expenses if the wife did not work outside the home. It seems like another way of saying what we just said. Let's hold on to it. They should reduce their expenditure on luxury items in order to eliminate the consumer debt. So they don't talk about the consumer debt as in our national consumer debt, right? It's sort of mixed up. They talk about luxury items and stuff, but they don't really talk about how that relates to the national consumer debt. So expenditures for college education often mean that these families need to take out a second mortgage on their homes. I don't recall reading that, especially not in this area where they're talking about the dual income family. D, they spend more of their household income on food than on medical care. They talk about the amount of money that they spend on food. They talk about medical care here. They don't make this statement. This answer choice is mixed up. They have a lower standard of living than did families in the 1970s. No, they say they have a higher standard of living, if I remember correctly. This is an opposite. Let's see. It's higher standard of living. So I think it's A. They would have fewer expenses. It is a paraphrase of this area. Great. Just earned the hot streak badge. Nice. Let's take a look at another question. Everyone tell me in the chat box, what type of question are we dealing with here? We're dealing with an infer question, but they give us a little bit more of a hint, even though this is not an easy question, by giving us discretionary, something to search for. So where do we find discretionary? Oh, I was actually hovering right over it. What were they saying? It is reasonable to infer from the passage that discretionary purchases, let's see. Adjusted for inflation, the cost of some common items like refrigerators and televisions have decreased. This, which is allows middle-class Americans to achieve a higher standard of living than their parents, even as a much smaller percentage of their income is being spent on discretionary items like refrigerators and televisions. So, what are discretionary purchases? They account for a larger percentage of the middle-class family's expenditures than they did a generation ago. I don't think I recall that. It seems to be the opposite, if anything. Make up an increasing percentage of a family's expenses. They're saying that it's smaller percentage. Okay. Get rid of that. Are things like health care, insurance, daycare, and automobile expenses? No, you're saying refrigerator, and this is sort of mixed up, right? They talk about health care at least. but they don't talk about that in relation to this. Are not critical to a family's well-being. That seems like too opinionated. Or like include, yep, looks like we got it here. So I can point to it, it qualifies, it meets my criteria for the answer for an infer question, that I can point to it, and that it's the paraphrasing of something that's in the passage. This is a pretty consistent attribute of GMAT reading comprehension questions. We have a couple more questions to look at here, and that should be just enough time to get done in the next 5 minutes. Okay, go ahead and read this passage and tell me what, sorry, not this passage, read this question and let me know what type of question we're looking at. So we should be dealing with an explicitly stated question, where by this, according to the passage language, I know that that's what I'm dealing with. Since the 1970s, so this is where they're talking about the 1970s and the 1970s and the 1970s, and then again down here the 1970s. So since the 1970s, the fixed expenditures of middle class Americans. Fixed expenditures. So we talk about food here. Seems these are discretionary expenditures, and then these are some other important fixed expenditures, things you just have to get. So have expanded to include costs like student loan debt that was not generally included in the budgets of families. Talk specifically about student loan debt. And on an explicitly stated question, that should be explicitly stated. Have become more manageable. They don't talk about it becoming more manageable. In fact, if anything, I think it's the opposite. Have increased at a greater rate than the average household income. So here they say housing costs have increased, but household incomes have stagnated. Let's hold on to that one. Have become a smaller percentage of total household expenditures compared to housing costs for families living at or below the poverty line. This is totally out of nowhere. Let's get rid of that one. And then if we look at D, we got rid of A, we got rid of B, rid of D. Have become less of a burden on the household income than the cost of food and clothing. They don't mention this, but they do mention this right here. So we can go with C. Great, and just enough time to work one more question and get to our homework. Here we're dealing with what type of question? Everyone tell me in the chat box, what type of question is this? Let's see what people are saying.